Hello Comms 469 students. This video is about how to do your peer review memo on your peer's rhetorical analysis draft. So first I'm going to go to our schedule and just give us a heads up. We've got our drafts being submitted on the 25th, and you should be able to go to the Dropbox in D2L and see the submissions from yourself and anyone else in your peer review group. And that's where you can pick up the draft that's designated for you. So first, to find out whose draft you're reviewing, you go to this tab, and this one, it shows first of all whose draft is being submitted is on the left, and who's reviewing is in this column. So you can see that in this case, Robin's draft is being reviewed by Kendall. And if it's not submitted by the time that you need it as a reviewer, then you have the free range to choose any other draft that is accessible in your group's submission area on D2L in the Dropbox. But you can't get out of reviewing somebody, so you'll have to choose anyone and review them. So your memo then needs to be submitted by the deadline for the memo. So you have a week to write a 350-word memo. It's very short, and it's due before class begins on February 1st, and it gets submitted to the same place where you uploaded your draft and collected their draft. So by the end of this day, you'll have 5 drafts and 5 review memos if there's 5 members in your group, and they will be properly named files, I hope, so that the file names are very clear about who's reviewing whom in a particular memo. Okay, so I'm going to go to the assignment guidelines for memos, and as you can see, this one is about 3 different memos, and you'll have the same kind of memo at the end of term when you're reviewing a term project draft. Memo 2 is about a presentation, so this is more about a memo that reviews a draft, which is Memo 1 and Memo 3. And of course, keep in mind that these are small-scale rhetorical analyses, and these goals really help you to understand why you're doing what you're doing. And if you're overlooking some of these goals, sometimes you can go off track in your content. When you're doing your draft review, you are working as a mentor to some degree, so it's possible for you to integrate some suggestions for improvement, whereas in a presentation review, there's really no room to do that because their presentation's over and they're not going to represent it. Keep in mind that you're not influencing your peers' grade because for these many reasons. It's just not, you're not grading, you are reviewing what you see in a draft. But your feedback can still be helpful. Even when you're giving praise of what they've done well, it can help a person not throw out good material and encourage them that the draft is not all bad, and to show that you're able to see strengths as well as weaknesses. So of course, whenever you do give praise, it needs to be well-reasoned praise and not just empty flattery. So I'm going to skip down to a section. We already covered who will be reviewing whom. Aim for 350 words, and there's a wiggle room of about 10% word count. And here for this, this is an exception to the normal policy on word count because it's so short. If you sprinkle too many quotations in there, then it's going to artificially inflate your word count too much. Normally, word counts do exclude quotes of more than 40 words or more that are usually set off as a block in APA formatting. But in this case, because it's a short memo, if you quote them longer than 5 words, then that doesn't count in your own word count of 350 words plus or minus. There's also other things with your memo length. If you want to look at the policy, it's in our course handbook on D2L. You should also be formatting your documents text properly. That's part of the assignment. I do want a memo-like structure so that you're very conscious as you're writing this, that you're writing it to your peer with me as your observer. So the memo header is like this, and you introduce the memo next. The introduction to the memo is not like an introduction to an essay. It is interactional, and it has ethos and pathos functions. It does include an element of an evaluative thesis, and it does not preview any details. It's just a very short memo, so we don't need a preview. It's not like a 20-page document. And being very specific about the topic of their draft or presentation is very important, because otherwise your intro can be so generic that it could be for anybody's draft. In the body of your memo, I'm going to be looking at how you organize it. You should not organize it according to the structure of their draft or their presentation. So this applies to both kinds of memos, whether you're reviewing a presentation or a draft. Your paragraphs are structured by themes, and you should be using the 4 assigned topics that we're going to go through next. And each paragraph's opening should make it clear to me and to your reader what aspect are you reviewing, which of the 4 aspects. Try to consider rhetorical priority order, and usually it's in the order of content, then argument, then structure, then other things. But you can also see how the 4 topics are arranged below. But you could also think about, well, what's the most high priority for them to know about first? So think about your audience when you think about structure as well. Conclusions are not like essays either. They are usually a sentence or 2 in a memo, and you look to the future. It's very interactional again. You're not going to be repeating any of your main points. You're not going to be adding extra insights. So it's a very, very short conclusion. After that, you just have a sincerely in your name. Within your memo, you're going to be referring to the instructions and expectations. It's so easy to get off track and just get lost in their draft, thinking about it as a draft for any course. But keep in mind that your role is to evaluate how well it fits its own rhetorical situation. And its situation as a rhetorical analysis is as an assignment within this course. So especially when you talk about content, your main question should be, how well does the content adapt to the content assigned for this assignment, for the course that it's in, etc. Choosing and using rhetorical terms, and so you will be expected to use them to critique their draft, and to provide feedback that's positive, but you don't define any terms. I already talked about avoiding empty flattery and giving complete arguments. Claim data and analysis are covered as the argument structure that I want to see in all of your rhetorical analyses, as well as these miniature rhetorical analyses, these memos. So claim data analysis I'm looking at for every body paragraph. Here's some interesting and important features about your persona and style that make it different, again, from an essay. You're assessing the work, not the rhetor. So even though this is written to a person, to your peer, be very careful when you're using the word you, because you're not evaluating them. So sometimes when you say, oh, you didn't do this, or you said this, try to keep the focus not on the intention of the rhetor, which you can't read their mind. However, look at making the actual draft the subject of sentences. So parts of the draft, the intro, your paragraph on this subject didn't say this, or it did. So try to put, even instead of you can just say the introduction or the quotation by so-and-so. Using I is completely expected and actually helpful for ethos within the intro and conclusion. But in the body paragraphs, I do not want to see I feel, I think, I liked, and I enjoyed, because that makes I into the subject of the sentence, and it makes the verb the main verb of the sentence. It shifts the focus. And so it's often unnecessary as well. You don't need to have hedges or softeners if the sentence itself is respectful and true. The only time you might need it is to perhaps give a little narrative of your response as an example of the larger scale audience response, because their draft isn't written to you as a person. So whether you liked it or not is the side issue. It's important about whether, more important that their arguments be effective, not just for you, but for the target audience in general for their essay. This should be obvious. And using the right verb tenses is something you could look at when you are revising your memo to make sure that you are not changing your verb tense throughout when you're talking about their draft. Avoid using passive voice. This is something that can make your prose wordy, indirect, and less clear. And this is an example. X should be discussed. Instead, you say the argument should discuss X. Here's more specific stuff about the draft review memo. You can see this section heading is in red, and later down on this instructions document, there's another one in red that talks about presentation review memos. And here's your 4 items that you need to cover: content, argument, use of sources, and macro structure. And again, you don't have to necessarily go in that order, but that's the default order of rhetorical priority. However, if their use of sources is the most important thing that is currently getting in the way of the reader, then you could start with that if you want. Or you could start with something, let's say macro structure was so difficult to handle as a reviewer that you want to talk about that first. Okay, but default, this is the priority order. Try not to write your draft or your memo. Don't write your memo as if you're writing answers to these. These are invention aids. So I go through what does it mean to review content. You can use these questions to inquire about the draft you're looking at. These are just some of the questions that you could ask about its content. And like I said earlier, you're not writing answers to all of them. You're writing unified paragraphs that focus on a claim, data from their draft, and then a comment on that data and analysis. So these should help you to think about their draft. And these topics, it's not likely, unless you have very concise and complete arguments on those 4 points, it's not likely you might have any room to cover these. Okay, so I just want to put them here because I don't want you to get these issues confused with 1 through 4. These are separate issues and they're not as important as 1 through 4, and they shouldn't steal time or space from those issues 1 through 4. In your argument of your memo, you can include suggestions if you want, and if you have room within your memo to do so. Also, ethically and practically, it's not a good idea to spend time marking up their draft and then giving it to them. You can do this for your own sake if you would like to read actively their draft. However, it's not really useful at this point to fix anything because it's only a draft. They could completely throw away some of their sentences, completely revise them, and then all of the effort you went to doing fixing would be lost. Also, your role is not anything to do with writing, tutoring, editing, proofreading, or even, which would be unethical, co-authoring. You can give some suggestions, but they have to take it with a grain of salt, but you're not to intervene in their draft as if you are editing or proofreading. And that's another reason why stylistic patterns are only covered if you cover everything else. And it's not about editing. These are about repeated patterns. So that's the important thing. Now, I do have uploaded on D2L already a sample peer review. So I'm just going to briefly look at that. And it's in D2L under resources and handouts. So go to D2L, then go into the content area, then look down the left side in the menu, and there's an area for handouts and resources. So overall, this is a good one. This is from a course I had years ago. They're reviewing a draft. I'm not going to show the side comments right now, but there are some comments that you can see if you want to look at the downloaded version on D2L. But as you can see, this opening paragraph, it does have good ethos and pathos. It makes some generalizations. But what happens here is it's so generic that it could be about anybody's essay. This part here is a good subject line, but this is where the actual memo starts. And so this should be customized to the topics of their draft. Now, the coverage is good. However, when I'm looking at this opening sentence, there is an issue. So let's read it. The reason for choosing this artifact was appropriately situated within your introduction, and your analysis transitioned well throughout your rhetorical situation, analysis, and conclusion. So as I'm reading this, I'm going, okay, is this about content? Is this about argument? So I'm looking for, is this a paragraph about one of those four things? And I'm guessing that it's about structure, but it would be certainly helpful to identify structure by using a word like organization or the word structure within that sentence. Capitalizing a key term isn't necessary, and it's not a proper noun, so you could either leave it as all lowercase or you can italicize for the first time you mention a rhetorical key term, a theory term. So this has a little bit of a structural kind of issue because content, if it is talking about content, it's focusing on just the rhetorical situation section, which could be okay, but it makes it seem like this memo is only talking about a section of their draft. And you're not supposed to be structuring your memo according to the structure of their draft. So the question I have again is, which issue? Is this content? If so, then make a generalization about the content of the draft and then use just the rhetorical situation section as your example. That would be fine. Because of course, if you're talking about overall content, you have to focus your evidence when you give data. So here they have a suggestion for improvement, which was well reasoned. Overall, this draft has 438 words, which is 25% over. So it could actually be shortened a bit, and in order to make it fit within 350 words plus or minus 10%. Some of the things that they also used stylistically, the words were used right here as passive voice, and one of the things you should try to avoid is passive voice. Also the verb to use, sometimes it's just totally unnecessary. In this sentence, you could just simply say these elements invoked. You can skip over entirely this middleman verb of using. Okay, so just say that these elements invoked, and here again you use quotes. Just say, for example, the quotes. Again, here's a use of. You could just start your sentence with these resources help. Okay, so oftentimes the use of verb ends up making your sentence grammar indirect and wordy, a little wordy. Okay, a really good thing is using the word you. Okay, here it's your analysis, so it's making the analysis the object of analysis. That's good. It's not analyzing her. Here, it's not as clear, so it's better to say elements such as, okay, and go straight to the elements and talk about them and how they provided evidence. This is the conclusion. As you notice, it's 2 sentences long, it's only 2 lines, and it is actually quite good, other than the fact that it would have been better to once again customize it to their content, the content of the draft. Otherwise, it is rather generic and could be stamped on anyone's review memo. And that gives you some ideas about how to write your peer review memo. If you need any more support, you can also look in our handbooks. Okay, so, oh, the final thing to mention is that if you cite any of their citations, guess what? You need to use proper APA and also include a reference list. So this is completely optional. You don't have to recite what they cite. It does put you in the position of having to do it correctly. So you don't have to. And if you do, you'd have to do it properly. And this is not proper because these are not cited as they should be as online sources, perhaps. Okay, the end. Talk to you later.